I'm going to introduce myself if that's okay. Sometimes it's easier. My name is Mary Snell. I am a registered dietitian. I have been working with Jamie and their staff at Spire for several years. Prior to what I do now, I do a lot of lunch and learn presentations, and I do a lot of nutritional counseling. But I was actually the director of nutrition and wellness for Marsh Supermarkets, and honestly, I don't know if we all had a Marsh down here in this area.
We used to.
We used to, yeah. And then when Marsh went bankrupt last May, I found myself out of a job in terms of full-time employment, but have been keeping myself busy. Certainly doing, like I said, a lot of private nutrition counseling for a large employer in Indianapolis, and doing some work with Spire as well. And I'm going to apologize. I actually had a cold last week, so I lost my voice, and so I have a candy in my mouth, and I know that's not appropriate for a speaker to have something in her mouth, so I do apologize, but if my voice is going to sustain for the next 30 to 40 minutes, that's what we have to do. You know, when I heard from Spire and they said, you guys are starting a sort of a wellness program, and we're looking for a speaker in terms of nutrition topic, this was one that I had suggested. I do this quite often for a lot of different employers because I think this is a great one for consumers to actually understand this whole idea and this concept about sugar. I think there's a lot of immediate attention. There's a lot of confusion in terms of sugar, added sugars naturally occurring. Well, fruit has sugar. Does that mean I can or cannot have it? So when I worked in the supermarket for 6 years, I found that this was the topic that I really came across. A lot of times consumers were really confused when we looked at the label and then trying to decide, well, what can I have? So this is where we're going to start, hopefully kick off your wellness program with. I'd like to start with this particular slide because it is a nutrition label. I have two on here actually. The one on the left is the present nutrition label. Some of you may look at it, use it to guide you navigate through the different products in stores. This other one on the right is actually the new format, and I know my date's a little off on there, but this is really, it's to go in place in January of 2020. Just to kind of give you a little background, it actually was supposed to go into effect this summer of 2018. 2 years ago, in 2016, the Food and Drug Administration decided that the label needed an overhaul. We've had this old label in place since the 1990s. And certainly during that time, we've just not discovered, but we've really learned a lot more about nutrition, and maybe some changes are needed to that label format. So in 2016, the FDA gave large manufacturers 2 years, up to 2018, to change this label. And you may actually see this new format on several packages, because several companies did sort of rise to the challenge and change the nutrition labeling. Unfortunately, there was a lot of strong lobbying in terms of a lot of food manufacturers said, we're not really sure we can get it changed by 2018. Can you extend the deadline to 2020? So this is why it's 2020, where all manufacturers have to put this on their food products, and we'll go from there. But the reason I show both of you, both labels, is because on even the old label, we have this little category called sugars. And this is where a lot of people focus on, and they see this word, and sometimes it just really stirs up a lot of panic, sometimes a lot of anxiety. They look at the word sugars and recognize, oh my goodness, a lot of foods have sugars in it. Should I have it? I hear it's bad for me, and this and that. Notice on the new label, we've changed the terminology a little bit to try to bring more clarity to that category, but it's called total sugars. And then underneath it, it's talking about added sugars. And this is really where I want to start this presentation, and you'll notice at the very end of the presentation, we'll close with this particular slide as well. One thing I do want to point out is when we look at the label, it says sugars with an S. That's an important concept to understand. It is not sugar singular, but sugars with an S. So obviously it implies there must be more than one. Well, you know, the new label, the reason they are changing the new label to really zero in on this sugar concept, the dietary guidelines, they're changed every 5 years. So we are presently in the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans. They're really a nice set of, guidelines. Nobody really reads them because the government comes up with them. But one of the things in this particular set of dietary guidelines, for the first time, the government put a limit on sugar. You know, there's been a lot of hype, there's been a lot of information that we know about added sugars, and it states that added sugars, and it was very clear in the dietary guidelines that we're talking about added sugars. And you'll see through this presentation that there is a difference between added sugars and naturally occurring, and that's really what we want to try to get across to the consumers. Added sugars should only make up 10% of your daily calorie. Again, it sounds like a government guideline, but how do we really drill down, and how does that apply to us as a consumer? If you're consuming a 2,000 calorie diet, for instance, a very general calorie diet for the majority of Americans, it would mean that your added sugar intake should only make up about 200 calories. 10% of 2,000, or if you're following an 1,800 calorie diet, would be 10% of 1,800. But to make it easier, like I said, 2,000 calorie, 10% of that would be about approximately 200 calories of your daily intake should come from added sugars. So it's clearly not saying that added sugars are completely avoided or eliminated, because certainly I heard someone say, well, I might have a candy bar this afternoon, or I'm going to have a piece of cake or a cookie and so forth like that. We recognize that a small amount certainly is part of our diet, it's part of our culture. And so it's saying, yeah, only 10%, which is about a total of 12 teaspoons. And if we equate that into grams, it's 48 grams. Now you might be sitting there thinking, 12 teaspoons, boy, that sounds like a lot of added sugars. Well, we're gonna talk about whether that is a lot and so forth, but keep that in mind. So guidelines are saying we should have a little bit in our diet. Well, actually, the American Heart Association, for years, even before these guidelines came out, the American Heart Association has been saying, no, women basically need 6 teaspoons a day, men need 9 teaspoons, and then teens are between 5 and 8. So you'll see that the American Heart Association for many years has been suggesting and recommending that we really even lower our added sugar intake less than what the dietary guidelines are. So that's where we're at. If you think about 12 teaspoons for dietary guidelines, and even less for the American Heart Association. Well, what is the big deal with these added excess sugars? Well, they do increase, they add up to excess calories. And what we have seen through the years are some statistics and how they are actually related to a lot of our chronic illnesses in this country. Number one, with obesity, and I have the statistics up there, basically 2 out of every 3 Hoosier adults are either overweight or obese based on BMI standards. And the CDC report came out in 2016 that the average American is actually 15 pounds heavier now than they were 20 years ago. In terms of diabetes, we definitely know there's a relationship with excess calories leading to excess weight. It definitely, again, the relationship with diabetes as well. It is a 7th leading cause of death in the United States. What is even more profound is that diabetes definitely is a gateway to heart disease. And heart disease is the #1 killer of U.S. men and women, not only in Indiana, but across the country. So, so there is definitely a relationship between diabetes and heart disease. And we also know that increasing added sugars certainly leads to inflammation, triglycerides, insulin impairment and regulation, and so forth. And there's really just a whole list of type of adverse effects that are related to the excess sugars and the excess calories. I mean, years and years ago, we would avoid excess sugars because we didn't want to get cavities. I mean, I remember growing up, we couldn't have candy and this and that because my mom would say, certainly, you want to save your teeth and so forth. We have gone beyond that. It's not just about dental cavities and so forth. It is now about its relationship to some of these chronic illnesses, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, certainly different cancers. So we're understanding a lot more about what added sugars can do to us in terms of our health. Well, here is the truth about where we are in America. Now remember, the dietary guidelines said we should limit it to about 12 teaspoons a day. Here is the truth. This is the harsh reality of what we're consuming in this country. Adults, the average consumption is 22 teaspoons. So if we decrease to 12, my goodness, we would be making a huge impact on our health. What's even more alarming is look at what the teens are consuming. Teens are consuming average consumption of 34 teaspoons a day. This is on a daily amount. I mean, if you ever measured out 34 teaspoons, I will do this presentation for high school seniors or high school students. And before I get to this slide, we always have sort of a guessing game, and I will ask them sort of their input. What do you think you guys on average consume on a daily basis? And of course, you throw out numbers like, 5 teaspoons a day, 10, 15, 20. I mean, when we get up to 30, and I go, nope, higher than that, I mean, they're all alarmed because as they're yelling out these numbers, I'm measuring out teaspoons of sugar, literally measuring them out and putting them in bowls so they can visually see what 34 teaspoons looks like. And they're all just really surprised. Where's it coming from? Well, you know, some of us think, oh, okay, sugar, candy bars, ice cream, cookies, cakes, pies, and things like that. Nope. All those provide added sugars. The largest contributor of added sugars in our country is coming from beverages. And a lot of times we don't know how many teaspoons of sugar we're drinking because it's dissolved. We don't see it. Well, I'm going to show you visually what is in a bottle here. 20-ounce Mountain Dew. Wow. 19.25 teaspoons. It is almost half a cup. That's almost half a cup of sugar right there. And if I would set this in front of somebody and say, I'd like for you to consume that, most likely I would go, are you kidding me? There's no way. I mean, how much time do I have to consume that? Well, what if I put this in front of someone and they're like, well, I can drink that. You know, when we don't see it and it's dissolved in liquid, it's just out of sight, out of mind. And we don't recognize, so let's think about this. So when I said teens are consuming an average of 34 teaspoons a day, you know, there are a lot of teens, unfortunately, that might consume a sweetened beverage, whether it be Mountain Dew or Pepsi or Coke. I'm not picking just on Mountain Dew. But let's say they throw in a Monster energy drink, which a lot of teens do. And then maybe they throw in a Gatorade because they're in a sport. And they think they need the Gatorade, you know, for the electrolytes and so forth and that kind of thing, when actually they really need water in terms of fluid. So can you see how quickly that adds up? I mean, just 2 Mountain Dews a day really exceeds the 34 teaspoons that our average teens are consuming, that teens are consuming on a daily basis. So this is the largest contributor. There is not a piece of cake or a candy bar that has 19 teaspoons of sugar in per serving. So even though we look at that and we go, oh my goodness, I've got to eliminate that. No, the beverages is where we have to eliminate that. And what's not even shown on here, obviously, is really the coffee drinks that we're consuming in this country as well. The McDonald's iced tea has 22 teaspoons of sugar. The McAllister's iced tea, the sweet tea, and those kinds of things also are packed with a lot of added sugars, and that's the key. You know, what's astounding here is when I, as a dietitian, meet with clients, and a lot of times, you know, weight management, diabetes, and so forth, without even looking at what they eat, I talk about their beverage first. And a lot of times that is actually the only, if we can change that one thing, I don't ever have to change anything else about their diet, to be honest with you. But, you know, drinking one less Mountain Dew or Pepsi, and this is again a 20-ounce, can save you close to 7,000 teaspoons of sugar for the year. That equates into almost a 30-pound weight loss. And as Americans, and remember what the CDC was saying, the average American weighs about 15 pounds heavier than they did years ago. You know, this little increase over the years adds up in terms of we don't recognize the calories, but the excess calories add up. And if I can have someone commit to one less 20-ounce sweetened beverage every day, at the end of the year, they change nothing else, we would see a weight loss of about 30 pounds. Again, everyone's different, but it would be certainly in that ballpark. And this is what we've seen. As I said, the CDC has said over the last 15 years or the last 20 years, we've seen this increase in weight. And many people, I've been a dietitian for over 25 years, I see people and they say, you know, Mary, I don't feel like I'm eating much more. And then when we think about the beverages, well, the beverage sizes have, you know, they increase over those years. You can stop in a convenience store, a gas station, wherever, and the sizes keep increasing, and we purchase what is available to us. You know, back in the 1980s, a 4-ounce beverage, I remember sitting around the table, that's what my mom would literally pour into our glass. We wouldn't have the luxury of having one of these per person. And as you can see, I only have 2006. Where are we in 2018? Clearly, we've exceeded a 12-ounce type of portion. 44 ounce. And these are, the next couple slides are kind of fun because people go, well, you know, really, what does that equate to in terms of food? Well, a 20-ounce cola, again, has the same amount of added sugars as if we would consume 5 snack cakes. A 32-ounce sports drink, like a Gatorade, for instance, has the same amount of added sugars as 5 glazed donuts. And many times, again, 5 glazed donuts, that would be a lot for us to consume. what 20-ounce sweet tea is like consuming the same amount of added sugars that are found in 12 chocolate sandwich cookies. And then again, the coffee that we love is like is almost like consuming the amount of added sugars found in those 14 milk chocolates. So you can kind of see certainly that again, the added sugars content not necessarily comes from like all those desserts. We would have to eat a lot of those, but we very easily can just drink one of those servings of a coffee or a Gatorade and so forth. Well, let's go back to this, back to the label, because I want to explain a little bit about, again, this sugars, as I said, is an S. It's not sugar, and let me bring out my packet of sugar. As we, certainly think of sugar, this is sugar that is singular. This is sugars with an S, so it's clearly comprises of different kinds of categories, and it is, what it entails is we actually have naturally occurring sugars in the organic and chemistry world. There are naturally occurring sugars, and then there are added sugars. Well, if we look at these naturally occurring sugars, you might be familiar with some of those, but there are 6 that occur in nature. Glucose is a sugar that we commonly refer to if you know someone with diabetes and they prick their finger and they're checking that typically they say, my sugar is high today. Technically and chemically, they should be saying my blood glucose is high today. But in America, we loosely use the term sugar. And when we hear the word sugar, we kind of encompass it to mean almost all the different kinds, but they actually have their own special name. So the simple carbohydrate is what I like to call it. We have simple, we have complex. The simple carbohydrate that's found in our bloodstream is called glucose, and it is considered, again, in the chemistry world, a type of sugar. So we have this umbrella of sugars. We have fructose, and many of you probably recognize fructose. Well, that's the fruit sugar. Well, it's called fructose, and that's what helps sweeten our fruit. It's naturally occurring. This is not what the dietary guidelines is saying we need to limit. It says added sugars, not naturally occurring. So when I counsel customers in our grocery stores, again, and they look at fruit and those kinds of things, and I definitely have to say, listen, we're talking about added sugars, not talking about the produce department. I would love to see people eat more fruit. If more people had 34 teaspoons of naturally occurring sugar in the form of fruit, we would be eating about 9 servings of fruit a day. We don't, as Americans. We don't even touch that amount. So if we could change in terms of, instead of consuming that amount of added sugar in beverages, and I would love to see people use, maybe consume that amount in naturally occurring fructose. Not only would you get fiber and vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals, we would get so much more nutrition that way. There's the lactose. Lactose is the simple carbohydrate. Again, it is a sugar that's found in milk. So when you look at a milk label and you see this word sugars with an S, it definitely tells you, number one, okay, it's naturally occurring and maybe something added. Well, in milk, there is no added sugar. Now, chocolate milk, strawberry flavored milk, certainly there is added sugar. But in white milk, dairy milk, that sugar's content, and this one says 12 grams, that represents this one, lactose. And unfortunately, the label can't be a little more specific because it should say lactose, 12 grams. But lactose is a type of sugar, so it falls under this chemical category of sugars. We also have maltose, and then we actually have sucrose, and we commonly refer to it as sugar. So this is really, again, sucrose. We say sugar, and unfortunately we use that term sugar sometimes to represent all the other 5 above it. My blood sugar is high, that's glucose. Or there's sugar found in fruit, well, that's fructose. So we want to be certainly clear about how we use the word sugar and the type of sugar. So these are the naturally occurring ones. Now, there are over 46. I like to call them sweeteners, but these are added sugars. These are all fall under the category of sugars. They are sweeteners that food manufacturers use to help provide some sweetness to our foods, and you might recognize them. There's agave nectar, there's brown sugar, there's honey, there's high fructose corn syrup. There are different kinds of fruit nectars that food companies use. All of these provide sweetness to our products, and they all provide calories. and they are all considered added sugars. They're being added to the product to provide that sweetness, even above and beyond maybe what's found naturally in that particular product. I mean, there are some kinds of fruit juices out there that again have that naturally occurring fructose, but some companies might add additional sugar to that just to make it even sweeter. There are raisins that have naturally occurring fructose, but then there are also, believe it or not, sugar-coated raisins that are found in things like Raisin Bran and maybe some of our other cereals, when really maybe those raisins don't have to have added sugar to it as well. So there's about 46 sweeteners that food manufacturers use a lot of times, and the reason there's this many out there is because we as Americans don't like the word sugar. And when we see sugar in the ingredient list, we back away and say, can't buy that product. But you know what? A company might add the corn syrup. Nope, they might put that agave nectar, because a lot of people are more accepting of that particular sweetener. It still has the same number of calories, and it still is considered an added sweetener or an added sugar. So when you have a product like this, and we look at that ingredient list, and we have sugar listed, we have fructose listed, we have corn syrup, sugar again, honey, dextrose. We have several types of added sugars in this particular product. But unfortunately, when we look at the word sugars on our label, it's awfully hard for us to figure out of that total amount that's listed 14, how much of it is added, because that's really what we need to zero in on. And that's exactly why with this new label format, the government has said this is a way to help consumers really kind of wade through this sugars category, so we're not getting confused about what's naturally occurring and what is actually added. And this is why the new label is really so good for us in terms of, conquering this whole concept of added sugars, and how do we really limit it to 10% of our calories. A few manufacturers, Coca-Cola for instance, has really started to label their products using a new format. Let's take a look at it. The new format gives you, again, the total amount of carbohydrates that's in there. And then these subcategories, it will tell you out of those carbohydrates how many are total sugars with an S. Okay, so that really should clue you in what's naturally occurring and what's added. Well, in a product like this, all of those total sugars are added. I mean, Coca-Cola really doesn't have any naturally occurring kind of sugars. So this is where, again, as a consumer, you zero in on that and you go, oh, of all those carbohydrates or of all those total sugars, I know that all of those in this particular product are added. This is what the dietary guidelines are really talking about and need to limit. Here's how we then change grams to teaspoons. You divide that number by 4. So let's kind of estimate, and let's just say it's 40. 40 grams of added sugar, divide by 4, that's 10 teaspoons, roughly, of added sugar in this particular product. This is a 12-ounce can. So it's the small can, and this is 10 teaspoons of sugar. Remember, the dietary guidelines said for if you're following a 2,000 calorie diet, the limit would be 12. So, you could have one of these on a daily basis if you like, something sweet. It's a 12-ounce can, but that's pretty much hits the limit of what the dietary guidelines is saying in terms of added sugars. So it kind of takes us back to that original slide that we started out in terms of hopefully now as you look at this label, the best we can do right now with this old label, because we've not all switched over to this new format, is when you see the word sugars, number one, recognize that it's a category that encompasses naturally occurring and added. You can certainly make some kind of an assumption when you look at the ingredient list on that and kind of pick up, okay, here's a sweetener, here's a sweetener, here's a sweetener. And you can certainly in your mind think, wow, there's a lot of different sweeteners used in that product. But unfortunately with today's label, it's awfully hard then to kind of separate what's naturally occurring and what is added. When we go to this new format, clearly in 2020, when all food manufacturers have to abide by this law, you will be able to clearly zero in on this one category that clearly talks about added sugars. And that's where we can start making some changes. And it's really then, it would be easy then to compare products and say, well, this one's got a lot of added sugars and so forth, and some are more naturally occurring. So the ones that are naturally occurring will not be obviously part of the added sugars value. It will be part of total sugars, because there's two categories, and then we'd separate it even further with this new label to give us a clue into how much is being added, because some of us have no idea. Up until that time, like I said, the largest contributor of added sugars are beverages. So that's one area, certainly, if you're thinking about what can I do and change and get on this path to wellness, really think about and reflect in terms of, what beverages are you consuming? Some of you might say, I don't really drink any soft drinks. I'm not a Gatorade person. I'm not an energy drink. But think about, maybe, are you a coffee drinker in terms of stopping at a Starbucks or wherever? Because again, there's a lot of hidden sugars in those particular drinks as well. And I think that might be my last slide. I had hoped to really kind of make this about a 30-minute presentation and allow some minutes for questions. So any questions you might have?